All right. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about, we're going to read Evelyn Underhill's book on mysticism. Welcome. It's a book from 1910. We're continuing on. You can start here or start any of the videos on the playlist on my YouTube channel. Go there. And make sure to like and subscribe and all of those things. Okay, so let's begin. It's talking about the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. Just be present. All right. We're on the part of the illuminated vision of the world, the illumination of the self. It's not a video of mine, right? Until I shift this. I thought I had it all perfect. It always happens like that, right? All right, I have a better idea. There. Here we go. Very clearly connected with the sense of the presence of God or power of perceiving the absolute is the complementary mark of the illuminated consciousness, the vision of a new heaven and a new earth, or an added significance and reality in the phenomenal world. Such words as those of Julian, Julian of Norwich, quote, God is all thing that is good as to my sight, and the goodness that all thing hath, it is he. God is all thing that is good as to my sight, and the goodness that all thing hath, it is he. Everything that's good is made out of God. It's God that's the good. That's in the revelations of divine love. Seem to provide the link between the two. Here again, we have to distinguish carefully between vaguely poetic language, the, quote, the light that never was, every common bush afire with God, and the descriptions which relate to a concrete and definite psychological experience. This experience at its best balances and completes the experiences of the presence of God at its best. That is to say, its note is sacramental, not ascetic. It entails the expansion rather than the concentration of consciousness, the discovery of the perfect one ablaze in the many, not forsaking of the many in order to find the one. The discovery of the perfect one ablaze in the many, not forsaking of the many in order to find the one. Its characteristic expression is, quote, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. Not, quote, turn thy thoughts into thy own soul, where he is hid. It takes as a rule the form of an enormously enhanced mental lucidity, a sharpening of the senses, as it were, whereby an ineffable radiance, a beauty, and a reality never before suspected are perceived by a sort of clairvoyance shining in the meanest things. Oh, okay, so it's like the God essence shining in the smallest of things, like, dropping my camera and not having a place or whatever, like, this, whatever. Like, when you're in nature, it can happen, like just seeing a thing without naming it. As soon as you say, oh, that's a tree, that's a bird, then you have it in a box. But when you're just present with it, you're more likely to see the eternal behind it, within it, shining through it. Quote, from the moment in which the soul has received the impression of deity in infused horizon, says Malaval, she sees him everywhere, by one of love's secrets, which is only known of those who have experienced it. The simple vision of pure love, which is marvelously penetrating, does not stop at the outer husk of creation. It penetrates to the divinity which is hidden within. Thus, Browning makes David declare, I but open my eyes, and perfection, no more and no less, in the kind I imagine, full fronts me, and God is seen, God in the star, in the stone, in the flesh, in the soul, and the clod, the clod of mud, even that. I but open my eyes, and perfection, no more and no less, in the kind I imagined, full fronts me, and God is seen, God in the star, in the stone, in the flesh, in the soul, and the clod, and the earth. We're made out of earth. Adam means ruddy, like red ground, like we're Blake's, quote, to see a world in a grain of sand, and Tennyson's flower in the crannied wall. Vaughan's, quote, each bush and oak doth know I am. The I am. And the like are exact, though overquoted reports of the things seen in this state of consciousness, this, quote, simple vision of pure love, the value of which is summed up in Meister Eckhart's profound saying, quote, the meanest thing that one knows in God, for instance, if one could understand a flower as it has its being in God, this would be a higher thing than the whole world. Our bookmark. Many mystical poets of the type of Wordsworth and Walt Whitman possessed to a considerable extent this form of illumination. It is this which Buck, B-U-C-K-E, the American psychologist, has analyzed in great detail under the name of, quote, cosmic consciousness. Wow, this book was written in 1910. I said at the beginning, that it could have been written in, 2210, it's a classic, all right. It is seen at its fullest development in such cases as those of Fox, Boehm, and Blake. We will first take the experience of Jacob Boehm, both because in his case we have first-hand description, which is particularly detailed and complete, and because he is one of the best recorded all-round examples of mystical illumination, exhibiting, along with an acute consciousness of divine companionship, all those phenomena of visual lucidity, automatism, and enhanced intellectual powers which properly belong to it, but are seldom developed simultaneously in the same individual. In Boehm's life, as described in the introduction to the English translation of his collected works, there were three distinct onsets of illumination, all of the pantheistic and external type, In the first, which seems to have happened whilst he was very young, it is said that he was surrounded by a divine light for 7 days, and stood in the highest contemplation and kingdom of joy. This perhaps we may reasonably identify with mystical awakening of the kind experienced by Suso. About the year 1600 occurred the second illumination, initiated by a trance-like state of consciousness, the result of gazing at a polished disc. To this I have already referred in an earlier chapter. This brought with it that peculiar and lucid vision of the inner reality of the phenomenal world, in which, as he himself says, he looked into the deepest foundation of things. He believed that it was only a fancy, and in order to banish it from his mind, he went out upon the green. But here he remarked that he gazed into the very heart of things, the very herbs and grass, and the actual nature harmonized with what he had inwardly seen. And that actual nature harmonized with what he had inwardly seen. Of this same experience and clairvoyance which accompanied it, another biographer says, quote, "Going abroad in the fields to a green before Ney's gate at Gorlitz, he there sat down, and viewing the herbs and grass of the field in his inward light, he saw into their essences, use, and properties, which were discovered to him by their lineaments, figures, and signatures." In the unfolding of these mysteries, before his understanding, he had a great measure of joy, yet returned home and took care of his family and lived in great peace and silence, scarce intimating to any these wonderful things that had befallen him. So far as we can tell from his own scattered statements, Boheme must have lived from this time onwards in a fairly constant and growing consciousness of the transcendental world, though there is evidence that he, like all other mystics, knew seasons of darkness, many a shrewd repulse, there's a quote, many a shrewd repulse, and times of struggle with that, quote, powerful contrarium, end quote. The lower consciousness. In 1610, perhaps as a result of such intermittent struggles, the vivid illumination of 10 years before was repeated in an enhanced form, and it was in consequence of this, and in order that there might be some record of the mysteries upon which he had gazed, that he wrote his first and most difficult book, The Aurora, or Morning Redness, the passage in which the inspired shoemaker had tried hard to tell us what his vision of reality was like, to communicate something of the grave and enthusiastic travail of his being, the indicable knowledge of things to which he attained, as one of those which arouse in all who have even the rudiments of mystical perception, the sorrow and excitement of exiles, and you suddenly hear the accents of home. It is a musical passage, addresses itself to the whole being and not merely to the intellect. In its movement and in the quality of its emotions, it is like some romance by Brahms. Those who will listen and be receptive will find themselves repaid by a strange sense of extended life and exhilaration, consciousness of truth. Here, if ever, is a man who is straining every nerve to speak as he saw, and it is plain that he saw much, as much perhaps as Dante, though he lacked the poetic genius which was needed to give his vision an intelligible form. The very strangeness of the phrasing, the unexpected harmonies and dissonances which worry polite and well-regulated minds, are earnests of the spirit of life, crying out for expression from within. Boheme, like Blake, seems, quote, drunk with intellectual vision, a God-intoxicated man. In this my earnest and Christian seeking and desire, he says, wherein I suffered many a shrewd repulse, but at last resolved rather to put myself in hazard than give over and leave off. The gate was opened to me, that in 1/4 of an hour I saw and knew more than if I had been many years together at an university, at which I exceedingly admired, and thereupon turned my praise to God for it. For I saw and knew the being of all beings, the abyss, and the eternal generation of the Holy Trinity, the descent and original of the world and of all creatures through the divine wisdom. knew and saw in myself all three worlds, namely, this divine, angelical, and paradisical, and the dark world, the original, of the nature to the fire, and then thirdly, the external and visible world, being a procreation or external birth from both the internal and spiritual worlds. And I saw and knew the whole working essence in the evil and the good of the original and existence of each of them, and likewise how the fruitful bearing womb of eternity brought forth, ellipsis. Yet, however, I must begin to labor in these great mysteries as a child that goes to school. I saw it in a great deep in the internal, for I had a thorough view of the universe, as in a chaos, wherein all things are couched and wrapped up. But it was impossible for me to explain the same, yet it opened itself to me from time to time, as in a young plant, though the same was with me for the space of 12 years as it were, breeding, and I found a powerful instigation within me before I could bring it forth into external form of writing, and whatever I could apprehend with the external principle of my mind, that I wrote down. Close to this lucid vision of reality of things, this sudden glimpse of the phenomenal in the light of the intelligible world, is George Fox's experience at the age of 24, as recorded in his journal. Here, as in Boehme's case, it is clear that a previous and regrettable acquaintance with the doctrine of signatures has to some extent determined the language and symbols under which he describes the intuitive vision of actuality as it exists in the divine mind. Now was I come, here's a quote, up in spirit through the flaming sword into the paradise of God. All things were new, and all the creation gave another smell unto me than before, beyond what words can utter. The creation was open to me, and it was showed me how all things had their names given them, according to their nature and virtue. And I was at a stand in my mind whether I should practice physic for the good of mankind, seeing the nature and virtue of the creatures were so open to me by the Lord. Ellipsis. Great things did the Lord lead me unto, and wonderful depths were opened unto me, beyond what can by words be declared. But as people come into subjection to the Spirit of God and grow up in the image and power of the Almighty, they may receive the word of wisdom that opens all things, and come to know the hidden unity in the eternal being. To know the hidden unity in the eternal being, know it with an invulnerable certainty, and in the all-embracing act of consciousness, which we are aware of the personality of those we truly love, is to live at its fullest the illuminated life, enjoying all creatures in God and God in all creatures. Lucidity of this sort seems to be an enormously enhanced form of the true poetic consciousness of otherness in natural things, the sense of unity and separateness, a mighty and actual life beyond that which eye can see, a glorious reality shining through the phenomenal veil, frequent in those temperaments which are at one with life, often, as in Blake, a permanent accompaniment of the illuminative state, and a constant, though transitory feature in conversions of all kinds. The self becomes conscious, as it were, of that world of becoming, that great and many-colored river of life in which the little individual life is immersed, alike in howling gale and singing cricket. It hears the crying aloud of that, quote, word which is through all things everlastingly. It participates actively and open-eyed into the mighty journey of the Son towards the Father's heart, and seeing with purged sight all things and creatures as they are in that transcendent order, detects in them too that striving of creation to return to its center, which is the secret of the universe. A harmony is thus set up between the mystic and life in all its forms. A harmony that is thus set up between the mystic and life in all its forms, life with a capital L. Undistracted by appearance, he sees, feels, and knows in it and knows it in one piercing act of loving comprehension. And the bodily sight stinted, says Julian. But the spiritual sight dwelled in mine understanding, and I abode with reverent dread, joying in that I saw. End quote. The heart outstrips the clumsy senses and sees perhaps for an instant, perhaps for long periods of bliss, an undistorted and more veritable world. All things are perceived in the light of charity, and hence under the aspect of beauty, for beauty is simply reality seen with the eyes of love, as in the case of another, more beatific vision. Essere in carita ecce necess. She didn't translate that. For such a reverent and joyous sight, the meanest accidents of life are radiant. Maybe in charity, in love. I don't know. The London streets are paths of loveliness. The very omnibus looks like colored archangels. Their laps filled full of little trustful souls. Oh, that's such a sweet image. Often when we blame our artists for painting ugly things, they are but striving to show us a beauty to which we are blind. They have gone on ahead of us and attained that state of fourfold vision to which Blake laid claim, in which the visionary sees the whole visible universe transfigured because he has, quote, put off the rotten rags of sense and memory, end quote, and put on imagination uncorrupt. In this state of lucidity, symbol and reality, nature and imagination, are seen to be one, and in it are produced all the more sublime works of art, since these owe their greatness to the impact of reality upon the artistic mind. Quote, I know, says Blake again, that this world is a world of imagination and vision. I see everything I paint in this world, but everybody does not see alike. To the eye of a miser, a guinea is far more beautiful, a penny, than the sun, and a bag worn with the use of money has more beautiful proportions than a vine filled with grapes. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing which stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and by these I shall not regulate my proportions, and some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. As a man is, so he sees. As the eye is formed, such are its powers. You certainly mistake when you say that the visions of fancy are not to be found in this world. To me, this world is all one continued vision of fancy or imagination, and I feel flattered when I am told so. If the mystic way be considered as a process of transcendence, of movement of the self towards free and conscious participation in the absolute life, and a progressive appropriation of that life by means of the contact which exists in the deeps of man's being, the ground or spark of the soul, between the subject and the transcendental world, then this illuminated apprehension of things, this cleansing of the doors of perception, is surely what we might expect to occur as man moves towards higher centers of consciousness. His surface intelligence, purified from the domination of the senses, is invaded more and more by the transcendent personality, the new man who is by nature a denizen of the independent spiritual world, and whose destiny, in mystical language, is a return to his origin. Hence an inflow of new vitality, extended powers of vision, and enormous exaltation of his intuitive powers. In such moments of clear sight and enhanced perception as that which Blake and Boehm describe, the mystic and the artist do really see subspecie eternitas, the fourfold river of life, the world of becoming in which, as Erigena says, every visible and invisible creature is a theophany or appearance of God. As all might see it, if prejudiced selfhood or other illusions did not distort their sight. From this loving vision, there comes very often that beautiful sympathy with that abnormal power over all living natural things, which crops up over and over again in the lives of the mystical saints, to amaze the sluggish minds of common men, barred by the, quote, torrent of use and want, from all communion alike with their natural and supernatural origin. Yet it is not so very amazing that St. Francis of Assisi, feeling and knowing, not merely believing, that every living creature was veritably and actually a theophany or appearance of God, should have been acutely conscious that he shared with these brothers and sisters of his the great and lovely life of the all. Nor this being so, can we justly regard him as eccentric because he acted in accordance with his convictions, preached to his little sisters, the birds, availed himself of the kindly offices of the falcon, enjoyed the friendship of the pheasant, soothed the captured turtle doves, his, quote, simple-minded sisters, innocent and chaste, end quote, or persuaded his brother wolf to a better life. The true mystic, so often taunted with a, quote, denial of the world, does but deny the narrow and artificial world of self, and finds in exchange the secrets of that mighty universe which he shares with nature and with God. Strange contacts, unknown to those who only lead the life of sense, are set up between his being and the being of all other things. In that remaking of his consciousness which follows upon the mystical awakening, the deep and primal life which he shares with all creation has been roused from its sleep. Hence the barrier between human and non-human life, which makes man a stranger on earth as well as in heaven, is done away. Life now whispers to his life, and all things are his intimates, and respond to his fraternal sympathy. Thus it seems quite a simple and natural thing to the little poor man of Assisi, whose friend the pheasant preferred his cell to the haunts more natural to its state, that he should be ambassador from the terrified folk of Gubbio to his formidable brother, the wolf. The result of the interview, reduced to ordinary language, could be paralleled in the experience of many persons who have possessed this strange and incommunicable power over animal life. A wondrous thing, when as St. Francis had made the sign of the cross, right so the terrible wolf shut his jaws and stayed his running, and when he was bid, came gently as a lamb and lay down at the feet of St. Francis. And as St. Francis, stretching forth his hand to take pledge of his troth, the wolf lifted up his right paw before him and laid it gently on the hand of St. Francis, giving thereby such a sign of good faith as he was able. Then quoth St. Francis, Brother wolf, I bid thee, in the name of Jesus Christ, come now with me, nothing doubting, and let us go establish this peace in God's name. And the wolf, obedient, set forth with him in fashion as a gentle lamb, whereat the townsfolk made mighty marvel beholding. And thereafter this same wolf lived 2 years in Agobio, and went like a tame beast in and out of the houses from door to door, without doing hurt to any, or any doing hurt to him, and was courteously nourished by the people. And as he passed thuswise through the country and the houses, never did any dog bark behind him. At length, after a 2 years' space, Brother Wolf died of old age, whereat the townsfolk sorely grieved. Sith, marking him pass so gently through the city, they minded them the better of the virtue of the sanctity of St. Francis. One second. Excuse me. In another mystic less familiar than St. Francis to English readers, Rose of Lima, the Peruvian saint, this deep sympathy with natural things assumed a particularly lovely form. To St. Rose, The whole world was a holy fairyland, in which it seemed to her that every living thing turned its face towards eternity and joined her adoration of God. It is said in her biography that, quote, when at sunrise she passed through the garden to go to her retreat, she called upon nature to praise with her the author of all things. Then the trees were seen to bow as she passed by and clasp their leaves together, making a harmonious sound. The flowers swayed upon their stalks and opened their blossoms that they might scent the air, thus according to their manner, praising God. And at the same time, the birds began to sing and came and perched upon the hands and shoulders of Rose. The insects greeted her with a joyous murmur, and all which had life and movement joined in the concert of praise she addressed to the Lord. Again, and here we seem to catch an echo of the pure Franciscan spirit, the gaiety of the troubadours of God. During her last Lent, each evening at sunset, a little bird with an enchanting voice came and perched upon a tree beside her window and waited till she gave the sign for him to sing. Rose, as soon as she saw her little feathered chorister, made herself ready to sing the praises of God and challenged the bird to this musical duel in a song which she had composed for this purpose. Begin, dear little bird, she said, begin thy lovely song. Let thy little throat, so full of sweet melodies, pour them forth, that together we may praise the Lord. Thou dost praise thy Creator, I my sweet Savior. Thus we together bless the deity. Open thy little beak, begin, and I will follow thee, and our voices shall blend in a song of holy joy. At once the little bird began to sing, running through his scale to the highest note. Then he ceased, that the saint might sing in her turn. Thus did they celebrate the greatness of God turn by turn for a whole hour, and with such perfect order that when the bird sang, Rose said nothing, and when she sang in her turn, the bird was silent and listened to her with a marvelous attention. At last, towards the 6th hour, the saint dismissed him, saying, Go, my little chorister, go fly far away, but blessed be my God, who never leaves me. The mystic whose illumination takes such forms as these, who feels with this intensity the closeness, the bond of love which binds in one book the scattered leaves of all the universe, dwells in a world forever shut to the desirous eyes of other men. He pierces the veil of imperfection and beholds creation with the Creator's eye. The, quote, pattern is shown him in the mount. The whole consciousness, says Reisejak, is flooded with the light of unknown to unknown depths, under the gaze of love, from which nothing escapes. In this state, intensity of vision and sureness of judgment are equal. The things which the seer brings back with him when he returns to common life are not merely partial impressions or the separate knowledge of science or poetry. They are rather truths which embrace the world, life, and conduct. In a word, the whole consciousness. It is curious to note in the various diagrams of experience which we have inherited from the more clear-sighted philosophers and seers, indications that they have enjoyed prolonged or transitory periods of this higher consciousness described by Reisejak as the marriage of imaginative vision with the moral transcendence. I think it at least reasonable supposition that Plato's theory of ideas owed its inception to some intuition of this kind. For philosophy, though it prate of pure reason, is more often found to be based upon psychological experience. The Platonic statements as to the veritable existence of the idea of a house, a table, or a bed, and other such painfully concrete and practical applications of the doctrine of the ideal, which have annoyed many metaphysicians, become explicable on such a psychological basis. That illuminated vision in which all, quote, all things are made new, end quote, can afford to embrace the homeliest as well as the sublimest things. And as a matter of experience, it does do this, seeing all objects, as Monet saw the Hayrick as, quote, modes of light. Blake said that his cottage at Felpham was a shadow of the angels' houses. And I have already referred to the case of the converted Methodist who saw his horses and hogs on the ideal plane. Again, when Plotinus, who is known to have experienced ecstatic states, speaks with the assurance of an explorer of an intelligible world and asks us what other fire could be a better image of the fire which is there than the fire which is here, or what other earth than this of the earth which is there, we seemed to detect behind the trappings of Neoplatonic philosophy a hint of the same type of first-hand experience. The unknown minds to whom we owe the Hebrew Kabbalah found room for it too in their diagram of the soul's ascent toward reality. In the first Sephra, above Malkuth, the world of matter, or lowest plane upon that tree of life, which is formed by the 10 emanations of the Godhead, is, they said, Yesod, the archetypal universe. In this are contained the realities, patterns, or ideas, whose shadows constitute the world of appearance in which we dwell. The path of the ascending soul up the tree of life leads him first from Malkuth to Yesod, i.e., human consciousness in the course of its transcendence passes from the normal illusions of men to a more real perception of the world, a perception which is symbolized by the archetypal plane or world of Platonic ideas. Everything in temporal nature says William Law, is descended out of that which is eternal and stands as a palpable, visible outbirth of it. So when we know how to separate the grossness, death, and darkness of time from it, we find what it is in its eternal state, in eternal nature, or the kingdom of heaven. Materiality stands in life and light. It is the light's glorious body, or that garment wherewith light is clothed, and therefore has all the properties of light in it, and only differs from light as it is its brightness and beauty, as the holder and displayer of all its colors, powers, and virtues. When Law wrote this, he may have believed that he was interpreting to English readers the unique message of his master Jacob Boehme. As a matter of fact, he was spreading the news which a long line of practical mystics had been crying for centuries into the deaf ears of mankind. He was saying in the 18th century what Gregory of Nyssa had said in the 4th. And Erigena in the 9th, telling the secret of that inviolate rose, who can never be profane because it can only be seen with the eyes of love. This same belief in the perfect world of archetypes lurking behind the symbols of sense, leading them a measure of its reality, is discoverable in Hermetic philosophy, which is, of course, largely influenced by Kabbalism. It receives practical application in the course of the occult education to which neophytes are subjected, mental and moral training calculated to induce lucid vision of this kind. Such vision, a byproduct in true mysticism, never sought for, though often achieved, is the end at which magic deliberately aims. No magician was ever found capable of St. Catherine's cry, non voglio quello che esse date. I think we have a translation of that earlier in the book, but she didn't write it. That serene and illuminated consciousness of the relation of things inward and outward, of the hidden treasure and its casket, the energizing absolute and its expression in time and space, which we have been studying in this chapter, as at its best a state of fine equilibrium, a sane adjustment of the inner and outer life. By that synthesis of love and will, which is the secret of the heart, the whole world is seen and known in God, and God is seen and known in the whole world. It is a state of exalted emotion, being produced by love. Of necessity, it produces love in its turn. The sharp division between its inlooking and outlooking forms, which I have adopted for convenience of description, is seldom present in the mind of its adepts. They, cleansed, fed, and sanctified, are initiated into a spiritual universe where such clumsy distinctions have little meaning. All is alike, part of the new life of peaceful charity and that progressive abolition of selfhood, which is the essence of mystical development, is alone enough to prevent them from drawing a line between the inward personal companionship and outward impersonal apprehension of the real. True illumination, like all real and vital experience, consists rather in the breathing of a certain atmosphere, the living at certain levels of consciousness, than in the acquirement of specific information. It is, as it were, a resting place, the steep stairway of love, where the self turns and sees all about it a transfigured universe, radiant with that same light divine which nests in its own heart and leads it on. When man's desires are fixed immovably on his maker, and as for deadlines and corruption of the flesh, he is leaded, says Roll, of the purified soul which has attained the illuminated state, quote, then it is no marvel that his strength, manly using, first, as it were, heaven being opened, with his understanding he beholds high heavenly citizens, and afterwards sweetest heat, as it were burning fire, he feels. Then with marvelous sweetness he is taught, and so forth, in songful noise he is joyed. This therefore is perfect charity, which no man knows but he that hath it took, and he that it has taken. It never leaves sweetly. It never leaves. Oh, he that it has taken, it never leaves. Sweetly he lives, and sickerly he shall die. Sweetly, it is true, the illuminated mystic may live, but not, as some think, placidly. Enlightenment is a symptom of growth, and growth is a living process, which knows no rest. The spirit, indeed, is invaded by a heavenly peace, but it is the peace not of idleness, but of ordered activity, a rest most busy. Quote, a rest most busy. In Hilton's words, a progressive appropriation of the divine, the urgent push of an indwelling spirit aspiring to its home in the heart of reality is felt more and more as the invasion of the normal consciousness by the transcendental personality. The growth of the new man proceeds towards its term. Therefore, the great seekers for reality are not, as a rule, long deceived by the exalted joys of illumination. Intensely aware now of the Absolute whom they adore, they are aware too that though known he is unachieved, even whilst they enjoy the rapture of the divine presence, of life in a divine, ideal world, something they feel makes default. Sol voglio te o dulce amor. Dulce is sweet and love, something only you, sweet love, maybe. Hence, for them, that which they now enjoy and which passes the understanding of other men is not a static condition. Often it coexists with that travail of the heart which Tauler has called stormy love. The greater the mystic, the sooner he realizes that the heavenly manna which has been administered to him is not yet that which the angels are full fed. Nothing less will do. And for him, the progress of illumination is a progressive consciousness that he is destined not for the sunny shores of the spiritual universe, but for the, quote, vast and stormy sea of the divine, end quote. Here, says Royce Brooks, of the soul, which has been lit by the uncreated light, there begins an eternal hunger which shall never more be satisfied. It is the inward eagerness and aspiration of the affective powers and created spirit towards an uncreated good. And as the spirit desires fruition, and is indeed invited and urged thereto by God, she continually wishes to attain it. Behold, here begin the eternal aspiration and eternal effort of an eternal helplessness. These men are poor, indeed, for they are hungry, greedy, insatiable. Whatsoever they eat and drink, they cannot be satisfied. since theirs is the hunger of eternity. Here there are great feasts of food and drink, of which none know but those who are bidden. But the full satisfaction of fruition is the one dish that lacks them, and this is why their hunger is ever renewed. Nevertheless, there flow in this communion rivers of honey full of all delight, for the spirit tastes of these delight under every mode that can be conceived. But all this is according to the manner of the creatures, and is below God, and this is why there is here an eternal hunger and impatience. If God gave to man all of the gifts which all the saints possess, and all that he has to offer, but without giving himself, the craving spirit would remain hungry and unfulfilled. Wow. All right, that's the end of this chapter. It's chapter 4 in the second part of the book, which is the mystic way. And so chapter 5 is next, voices and visions. So we'll go into that next. I wish you so much peace, tranquility, love, mystic understanding as God wishes. All right, much love. Thank you for being here.